everyone, welcome back to Psychology of Rock. If you're new here, my name's Nina, and today we're diving back into the psychological DNA of rock and metal to see how each generation's unique upbringing and the specific world that they inherited completely redefined the music's message, sound, function, and of course, our personal connection with it. Now, part one of this series that I will link down below was focused entirely on the Boomer and Gen X eras. But today we are moving on to the Millennials. And I really wanted to combine it with Gen Z, but there was just way too much to get to fit into a singular video. And I have to tell you, if the Boomer Gen X story was about the struggle for liberation and individuation, the next chapter is about something entirely different. During this time, we moved from an era where music was a tangible, high-investment resource and a social currency that really defined your place in the world to an era of limitless abundance where music functioned less as a badge of identity and more as a tool for internal utility. And I think the story of how we got here makes complete sense when we look at everything that was happening at the time. And I also think that the emotional and behavioral shifts are incredibly fascinating. So let's jump on into the Millennial chapter, which I'm going to call the Bridge Generation. This group occupies an incredibly unique psychological space. They are the only generation that remembers life before the internet, but still had their entire adolescence defined by its arrival. So essentially, even though they were just kind of starting their lives, they had already lived in two completely different worlds. On top of that, just like the boomers, the world at the time was one of massive contradictions. But this time they had entirely new contradictions. On one hand, unlike Gen X, who basically raised themselves, most millennials were raised by overly involved helicopter parents who pushed academic and professional achievement alongside a fairy tale follow your dreams narrative. Yet, on the other hand, the reality outside their window was nothing short of terrifying. This generation grew up in the shadow of 9/11, the War on Terror, and the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Locally, the aftermath of Columbine created a new culture of school fear that no generation prior had ever had to deal with. And then, just as they reached the finish line of adulthood, the Great Recession hit, the most serious financial crisis since the Great Depression, bringing housing and job instability so severe that the American dream no longer even seemed like a possibility. Psychologically, this created a shift away from Gen X cynicism straight towards internalized anxiety. And unlike generations before, millennials did not blame the man as much as they blamed themselves, even though none of what they were going through was actually their fault. They had followed the very formula that they were told to follow. It just wasn't working anymore. And all of these factors combined did not just lead to a shift in mood, it actually contributed to a full-scale mental health crisis. This was the era where the struggle became clinical, defined by a massive surge in the use of anti-anxiety and antidepressant medications, and thankfully some much-needed real talk about psychological and emotional health. These are conversations that boomers and Gen X simply never got to have. And this is exactly why I think genres like Nu-Metal and Emo exploded. If we look at bands like Korn or Linkin Park or Slipknot, we can see the themes slowly start to move away from things like rebellion and institutional distrust, much more towards raw emotional dysregulation and trauma. And in many cases, even the most extreme music actually became therapeutic in a way because it showed real emotional honesty and transparency. Rock and metal truly became a safe haven for people who genuinely felt like misfits. And while most songs still focused on familiar topics like alienation, rage, and social rejection, it was much less emotionally detached and much more exposed and vulnerable than ever before. But this really is just the beginning of the conversation. The millennial years were also the birth of digital identity curation. On MySpace, your top 8 friends and your profile song became your personality architecture. This was a brand new concept. For Gen X, your music preference gave you a tribe in the physical world. But for millennials, music had become a tool for social signaling and emotional branding. This made rock and metal aesthetics much easier to monetize by opportunists, especially because millennials grew up during the peak overlap of mall culture, MTV visibility, and early internet forums, where subcultures were highly visible but still geographically scattered. So identities that once required local scenes could now be packaged and sold by places like Hot Topic, which did not sit well for some of the fans who saw these closed communities start to turn into open markets. For many die-hard metalheads especially, this gave way to musical gatekeeping on a level that I don't think we've ever seen before. But I think the biggest shift in this generation's relationship with music simply came down to technology. Napster and LimeWire had completely changed the game because music stopped being scarce and hard to obtain. Suddenly, seemingly out of nowhere, low-cost or even free music was literally at our fingertips at all times. The forced repetition of listening to the albums we already had over and over again was instantly replaced by the portable, personalized soundtrack. This fundamentally changed attachment, discovery, and album loyalty forever, and the psychological shift was clear. Music was moving from a collective listening experience to an individualized emotional regulator. But this era of digital abundance also triggered a massive fragmentation within the music itself. While Gen X built subcultures through the slow physical grind of tape trading and zines, millennials used the speed of the internet to hypercharge that evolution. They moved from hunting for a scene to having dozens of them instantly delivered to their desktops. For many people, nu metal did become the mainstream entry point. It was easy to relate to because it was catchy enough to dominate MTV and radio, but it also directly addressed the internalized anxiety that so many people were experiencing at the time. But as fans dug a little deeper, metalcore emerged as almost a bridge between generations, since it blended the raw transparency of the 2000s with the technical guitar heroes of the past. Meanwhile, digital platforms allowed more extreme or lesser-known subgenres to thrive independently of any local scene. Whether it was the escapism of symphonic metal, or the complexity of prog, or the DIY extremity of deathcore, the music kept fracturing to provide individual outlets for a generation that was now curating its identity one subgenre at a time. Unfortunately, however, this shift in accessibility also completely rewired the economics of the live experience. While recorded music became nearly free, the collapse of CD sales forced the industry to transform concerts from affordable local hangouts into high-stakes, experience-driven commodities. For millennials, this meant living through a jarring transition. They began the era seeing their favorite bands in clubs for $20, only to watch those same subcultures migrate to massive corporate-sponsored festivals where the price of entry became a luxury investment rather than a casual night out. And as we all know, the cost of shows has only continued to spiral out of control since then. Ultimately, however, I think the millennial era overall led us to a strange new reality. We gained a world where literally any song could be found in seconds, but that convenience quickly changed our emotional relationship with music and completely redefined what it was even for. Like I said in the last video, music really does evolve into exactly what we need it to be at the time. And I think the millennial evolution of music is a direct reflection of trying to cope with a completely unfamiliar reality. But again, this is not where the story ends. And as promised, we'll be getting into Gen Z's evolution in the next video. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on all of this and anything you'd like to add, so please leave your comments down below. Don't forget to check out part 1 if you missed it, and I will see you in part 3.